Hi, everyone. My name is Michaela McCarthy. I'm the event marketing lead here at NeuraFlash. Thank you so much for joining our panel discussion today. I'm excited for you to hear from Salesforce, NeuraFlash, and Customer Diligent, where we'll discuss what you should consider when leveraging technology to scale your business and how to streamline processes, standardize systems, and reduce costs. Before we get this panel discussion started, let me quickly go over some housekeeping rules. After this webinar, we'll be sending the recording out to you all for your convenience. On the Zoom platform, to submit your questions, you'll see beneath the screen a bar pull up. In this bar, please click the Q&A button anytime throughout the webinar. We'll have a 10-minute Q&A at the end for anyone to ask questions. We have 4 panelists that you'll be hearing from today. Let me introduce you to the first person you'll be hearing from, the person leading the discussion, Randy Sari, Senior Account Executive at NeuraFlash. Randy, I'll hand this session over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Michaela. And hopefully you guys can hear me. So Michaela, do we want to start now, or we want to give it a little more time for other people to join?
I think we're good to get started now.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you all for joining. We're very excited. For me personally, this has been a longtime customer, and frankly, we're seeing this all the time with a lot of our projects. Right? We have experience doing this and moving people onto Service Cloud specifically over hundreds of times. Right? So on top of that, we're seeing a more and more frequent move of moving off of sort of mid-market type of tools like Zendesk, like Freshdesk, so on. And we wanted to kind of talk through what has been successful for us, right? I think that's something that everyone in the ecosystem deserves to ultimately set them up for the future. So ultimately, that's what we're trying to talk through here is sort of why companies have done that, what they've seen as a result, and then again, some key factors to keep in mind to successfully deploy those. So additionally, I'll introduce myself and NeuraFlash, and then I'll hand it over to my team members to also introduce themselves. So Randy Sari, Account Executive for NeuraFlash, covering our commercial accounts for the US. To give you guys a background on NeuraFlash, we're a Summit partner of Salesforce, top tier, primarily focused around these service contact center transformations, right? We have expertise across the entire Salesforce platform, but this is really where we got started and what we focus on. With that, I want to introduce Evan. Evan, if you want to give a quick introduction of yourself, and then pass it over to Eugene.
Hey, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Evan Piquera. I'm the Change Management Practice Lead at NeuraFlash. Change management is a passion of mine, and I really enjoy helping people, teams, organizations go through the entire change process. It's something I've written books and articles on. I've advised customer experience programs for graduate programs, and just something that, again, happy to help and answer any questions that you may have. So thank you so much for joining, and I'm going to turn it over to teammate Eugene Master.
Great. Thanks, Evan. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Pleasure to meet you. I'm a director of solution architecture here at NeuraFlash. I also run the Service Cloud and Experience Cloud practice within the company. So anything Service Cloud, anything Experience Cloud, if you have any questions, just don't hesitate. And that's my expertise. More relevant to this specific conversation, I has been working on the solution architect with Diligent and on the Diligent projects at this point, going into 6 phases for the last 2 years or so, working very closely with Chris, who you'll get a chance to meet in a moment. So, and yeah, we'll be spending a lot of time talking about that transition in that project as well. So.
Perfect. Thanks, Eugene. And then last but certainly not least, Chris, and just to give you guys a background too. So Chris and I first met, 2.5 years ago in the Salesforce office in Bryant Park, New York. And we did mention eventually we would go on webinars. Eventually we'd get up on stage at some point. And this is our first step in that direction. So we're very excited. But Chris, you want to introduce yourself and maybe give us a background on Diligent?
Absolutely. Greetings from Washington, D.C. on a very windy Wednesday here, but thanks, Randy. Chris Zimmerman, I am Diligent's Director of Enterprise Project Management Office, which we established about 4.5 years ago or so to partner with all areas of business to implement change throughout all of Diligent, which we have done quite a bit of in my time there. But for those of you who do not know, Diligent is the global leader in governance, risk, and compliance SaaS solutions. We spend a lot of time with our solutions to drive better decision-making, increase transparency, and integrate all kinds of governance, risk, and compliance data across your whole organization. But as Randy said, we've been riding shotgun together here for about 2 years on Diligent's Service Cloud journey. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Chris. And yeah, just to give you guys a background too, they've been doing amazing acquisitions, owning their marketplace. So yeah, I will say for Chris too, if you guys are ever interested in that governance software, please reach out to him. With that, I want to pause before we jump right in. There is a good amount of people on this. I want to make this as relevant as possible, right? So I just want to throw out a poll question. I think Michaela's going to send it out to you right now, but ultimately what brought you to the roundtable today? And I think, right, we have, oh yeah, right there, 3 different options. If you guys just click one, that'd be very helpful to us to make sure that we're keeping this relevant. And I'll give it just a couple of seconds. Wow, Chris, a lot of people just want to hear you talk about it. All right.
It's going to be loved, Randy.
Just as I thought. Okay. All right. Well, we'll definitely talk through that, and actually we'll jump right into that. And then what else was there? We'll go to search. All right, perfect. So with that, Chris, let's kick it immediately over to you, and let's talk about sort of the why, right? So could you talk through at the very beginning of this journey, right? Like, what challenges were you guys facing with your current system? And then what were you really looking for in a new system moving over?
Absolutely. So I think, as Randy said, Diligent has been very M&A heavy over the last several years. And of course, what that means is you acquire a bunch of businesses on disparate platforms. So we've migrated off just about every single major support tool out there. Obviously, our mainline Diligent business was sitting predominantly on Zendesk, but Freshdesk, all those kinds of things. We even collapsed in a different Salesforce Service Cloud instance into our mainline as well. So we've gone from a whole bunch of different places, and really had a burning platform to collapse down to one spot. And of course, why? It was getting really hard to scale the support organization when we're in a whole bunch of different places. And frankly, even Zendesk was, we were starting to bump up against the limits of that tool set on our multi-product kind of go-to-market strategy. So we needed one place, and we needed a place that was going to be able to support us as we continued to scale the business. We're already an incumbent Salesforce customer at Diligent for our go-to-market activities. And we increasingly saw that having our customer data split between Salesforce and a different support platform was really not a great situation moving forward. We wanted all of that data to be in one spot. We wanted it to collapse onto one platform, because if we did that, we were pretty confident in our ability to unlock key insights out of that data, and frankly, serve our customers a heck of a lot better and be able to do a whole bunch of new things for them just by having all that data sitting there in one spot. So, obviously the M&A piece of it was important, but having all of that key data in one place to be able to action it, hugely important for kind of moving on to all the great things we can do as a company.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. And yeah, in alignment with, I'm sure, what a lot of people are seeing, and in the spirit of kind of getting people a little bit more engaged too. I just encourage anyone to raise their hand that's kind of going through the exact same thing, right? Whether it be merger and acquisition, whether it be streamlining and following into that Salesforce customer 360 that they often talk through and that we all talk through, right? Leveraging that data throughout the entire customer life cycle. So again, I encourage you to raise your hand, because it kind of shows us to, all right, well, you're not in this alone. With that, Eugene, I want to kick it over to you, right? you and I, Evan, we've done this now specifically for Zendesk, right? 15 so odd times for other platforms. Again, I talked through over 100. What are some of the pain points that you see our customers come to us with?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say a couple things, right? As you're looking to move to a more enterprise level system from a mid-market system, as you're making the move to Salesforce specifically, I'll use Diligent as an example, but I think this sort of applies to some of the other projects we worked on together. But first piece is just as you're looking to get more and more integrations into the system, right? Especially if you're doing merger and acquisitions, and there's all sorts of different systems that you need to connect to. One of the things that Chris spent a lot of time talking about was having good data in the system, right? And some of that is created directly in Salesforce, but a lot of that does exist in other places and is getting brought in and then is getting utilized and automated on in an efficient way, right? So to make sure we had a system that supported all the different places that data comes from, we wanted to make sure that, right, that's what we were building. And I think that's some of the limitations that the team was hitting earlier. The other piece, which I would say is pretty common, is just the quality of reporting that you're getting, making sure that, when it all does tie back into that data, right? But it's that you can actually action on it, that you understand how your team's performing. And that goes past just, what my volume is or what my average handle time is. I think it starts flowing into what the actual efficiency is of our users, right? So how long are people waiting before work gets automatically routed to them? How much time are people spending when they're not actually at full capacity, they're not being utilized? Is there an opportunity for some people to support other teams, pick up backlogs, things like that? So those are some of the things that we were able to start looking at in the new system where there were some limitations in the past. I think the other thing, once again, you'll see it's all sort of related to the same big picture. If you're looking to measure SLAs efficiently, right? If you're looking to understand whether you're hitting your milestones, right? Whether your entitlement process is set up properly, that's also where I think a lot of times we're seeing limits in the other systems where Salesforce has a lot of that built out of the box. So those are some of the areas that we tend to focus on, right? Making sure the integrations are right, making sure we're tracking performance, making sure we're understanding that SLAs are being hit, and if they're not, that we're able to action on them with some automation.
Perfect. And you pretty much touched on everything that I could think of, but Evan, I want to give you a chance to kind of talk through anything we missed in key consideration that people should have in this evaluation kind of and moving off of.
Yeah, I mean, Chris and Eugene hit it really well. I think the only other thing that I would add in there is just any major change like this, there's a lot of things happening on the technical side, but there's also a human and people element to it as well. And people naturally resist change. And that's something that I think a lot of people kind of going into this process, they underestimate. And so really taking a holistic approach where you're looking at how are we communicating to people? Who's communicating? When are we communicating? What is the key message that we want them to receive? Looking at things from a stakeholder engagement standpoint. Who are all the people that are undergoing this change? How do we bring them to the table? How are we incorporating their feedback? How are we ensuring that we are listening to them and they feel like they're heard as we go through this process? Training is going to be a big piece as well. And so just making sure that we're providing the people who are undergoing the change with the knowledge and skills to successfully change. And then one thing that I think a lot of people forget, and this is where kind of getting to that metrics piece that both Chris and Eugene were talking about, is how do we ensure that once we go live, that people continue to use the system, they continue to gain proficiency, they continue to add more volume, and we're able to actually see some business outcomes that come with people adopting the system. So a lot of this really takes a holistic understanding and really looking at the people who are undergoing the change, and then figuring out how we can motivate and really drive things forward.
Makes sense. And I know we're going to talk about it in the future here, but it does add to the why. And I think it is a differentiator to why people choose Salesforce, right? I mean, ultimately, there is no other solution out there that has even the self-taught library that Salesforce has with the trailheads, the partners that continue to invest in it, right? With us, right? We have you, who's an absolute all-star. We have a massive team under you as well that's focused primarily on that change management aspect. So again, it's a awesome why you ultimately want to switch onto one of these enterprise level solutions. Okay, pivoting into out of the why and onto more of the expectations. And Chris, I know we talked about this a little bit when we were waiting, but can you talk about some of the metrics or lack thereof metrics that you guys were reporting on, the KPIs, sort of prior to the actual switch to Salesforce?
No, absolutely. You know, when you're in disparate systems, it's really hard to get metrics that are the same and equal across the enterprise. So we were really starting from a position of weakness, frankly, just to understand what some of our basic metrics were. But, you know, in addition to that, we found it increasingly hard to use Zendesk to peel out the type of insights that we needed from their reporting package. It just, you know, when I talk about the ability to scale the organization via the technology, it was clearly an area where Zendesk was not cutting it for us anymore. And to be able to move ourselves onto the Salesforce, you know, Service Cloud tool set, to be able to have one place, as you know, everybody has said, to source those metrics from, but frankly, to then be able to tie those metrics to other, you know, customer focused metrics that were already in the system, really started to unlock a lot of good insights for us. And, you know, we've been on a multi-phase journey, as you know, Randy indicated. We're kind of moving into phase 6 here, but you know, with each phase, that collection of data gets more powerful, and we are able to suss out a whole bunch of more interesting insights. You know, just to use an example here, being able to understand, you know, what case volumes are for certain more transactional things. Understand that those things are not just being done by our support organization, they're being done by our customer success organization as well. But then to be able to just glom all that together in one place and figure out how we should be resourcing those customer, you know, needs in the future, really important, and frankly will help us continue to evolve our customer facing you know, organization as we move forward at Diligent.
Perfect, thank you. And I want to continue on that, but yeah, I mean, again, that's another thing that makes it so difficult for us, because we have a outcomes team, you know, led by Tom Hebner. We brought him in here as a hot shot to ultimately try to figure out some of these outcomes people had, and that's a big problem that we have, is like, well, they can't even track what they had prior, so it's hard to say what actually changed. But diving further into that, Chris, I mean, can you talk through some of the KPIs that you have now, some of the key indicators that you're tracking?
No, absolutely. I think, you know, we touched on it a little bit earlier, that when you are sitting in Zendesk and some of the smaller mid-market tool sets out there, you are in a position where your support agents often go out and grab cases, right? They're sitting there. Someone has to actively go do that. Using the Salesforce platform and kind of the omni-channel capability, it's much easier now to push all of those cases in, and frankly, you know, have our support agents be more receptive of those types of things. So more efficiently using our entire support organization, hugely impactful for us. We were very disparately set up by product teams and kind of product focused support teams before. We now have a centralized place with a centralized tool set where when you look at just the ability of the same size organization to handle a larger volume of cases, hugely important. At the same time, I know another key metric we look at is just case deflection. You know, we've not touched on it just quite yet, but you know, the customer facing community side of the Service Cloud platform, hugely important to allow the you know, customers of ours who wish to or can be self-served. Extremely important. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there that is easy to go find a knowledge base article on, and you can solve it without ever having to pick up the phone, chat at us, email us. You know, one of the many other ways to, you know, get in touch with our support team. But you know, we look at that a lot too, just to understand the things that our support team is working on, and to make sure that they are doing, you know, the more high value complex things that are out there versus the easy transactional things that frankly a good knowledge base article that is surfaced in the right way can also achieve.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. And then Eugene, I want to give you a chance, but one sec. I did see a question come in. First question of the day. It is framed towards you, Chris. Ultimately, they're asking when you're using Salesforce for the CRM and then you switched over to Zen for support, or you were on Zen and then switch over to Service Cloud. Did your entire company move to Salesforce Service Cloud, or was that part of it, just a part of implementation, which is great because I know this was a topic of conversation too.
No, absolutely. We were already on Salesforce as a CRM, and typically when you look at our merged businesses, obviously they all tend to come onto the platform at the same time in all those different areas as they come in. But when we were looking at kind of the overall migration journey, our sales and customer success teams were already using the Salesforce platform. We had made a choice to go with Zendesk previously. And frankly, after about 24 months, we realized that it just wasn't the right thing for us.
So then when you moved over to Service Cloud, again, like the question is more like, did you move the entire contact center for Diligent over to Service Cloud? Or?
We chunked it. We took it in bits and pieces. We knew what our capability was to absorb change at Diligent, and it was not a big bang approach to move everybody at once. We had about 12 different product lines and support teams that were moving over, so it was easier for us to kind of do that kind of phase transition. But we took a lot of looks on all the things that we had going on at Diligent and decided that frankly that phase transition was the most appropriate course of action. Worked for us. It might not work for you, but frankly, I think when you do take a phased approach, coming back to Evan here, it allows you to make sure that you are really focusing on all of those key and critical change management activities as part of that shift. And frankly, you do a really good job on the first phase, but there's always things to improve on. And you can incorporate those learnings into future phases. So I like a phased approach if possible. We tend to do it for a lot of large scale projects at Diligent, just based upon internal capacity and the knowledge that we want to make sure that we truly are focusing on both the internal and external communication sides here to make sure that a migration happens. It's a disruptive event, but you can try to really minimize that disruption with quality change management, and that's a very large focus for us.
Perfect. Yeah, spot on. And I know that was something we've talked about in the past too. All right, so getting back on track to ultimately when you were going over some of the KPIs you're seeing and tracking now. Eugene, I want to give you a chance to kind of talk through what would you suggest and recommend for people that are ultimately looking at making the switch of things they can track to better understand areas of impact and some things that we're seeing for our customers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'll just start off with something a little more blanket, and I'll let Evan talk to it a little more, but adoption is the first thing we want to look at, right? Making sure people are using the system, that they're using it effectively, that they're putting in all of the data that you're requiring for them to put into the system. But I think just to talk a little more about this Diligent specifically, and Chris already touched on it, we were moving them over into omni-channel. One of the reasons to do that was because we wanted to improve efficiency and we wanted to push work rather than pulling work. But the bigger story behind that is there were separate support teams for each of the products. Diligent was moving more towards a global support model where there's one support agent that can support multiple different brands. And there was a whole mix and match there, right? Where user A can support, or user number one can support ABC, user number two can support CDE, and then the ability to have flexibility there. But once you get to a model like that, it's tougher to say, check this queue for cases, check this queue for cases, check this one, right? Wanted to make sure that we're pushing work in an efficient way. So some of the things that we were looking at measuring is, one, within, what's the capacity of every single agent? Are people typically at full capacity? What percentage of the time are they at full capacity? Or are we seeing that their capacity tends to be pretty low? So maybe the groups that they're covering have less volume, aren't as busy, they don't take as much time. There's an opportunity to maybe move folks around or spread, the kind of products that they support. So we were looking at that type of information. take a close look at what the average wait time is. So, when an email comes in, how long does it take between that first getting queued up to when it ultimately routes to a specific person on your team, right? Differs per industry, differs at how big your team is. But I think we want to, one of the SLAs that we were looking at is first response time, right? So we want to know that when an email comes in within a certain amount of time, we're responding to the customer and that we're interacting with them. They were primarily soft SLAs on the diligence side, but that could and it was just internal measuring to make sure that diligent was hitting the standards that they set for themselves. But we were allowed to measure, hey, this came in, but it didn't get routed to someone until 3 minutes later, 10 minutes later, and begin to start looking at some average.
Which again was a massive win for, as they continue to engage on channels and having all the channels within Salesforce, right? You have the ability to actually see true call deflection and true first time response, right? Because then they're not going to another channel to get this responded. And then someone that's on a different tab in a different system, you can't really report on that. So that is another benefit too, but continue, Eugene. I didn't want to cut you off.
No. That's a great addition. I'll just sort of end it here. I think all going into this bigger picture of work efficiency, contact center, how are people performing, work routing. I think you're also able to look at the presence statuses of the different users. So if someone is going on break, you can have visibility, to say, hey, this person was actually offline for an hour and a half, and maybe that's why they didn't work enough cases, or this person was in a meeting for 2 hours that day, and that's the status that they send. So a lot of the things that you typically get, with your phone systems and with your IVRs, you can start getting some of that visibility through other channels as well, and begin reporting on it, which I think is really, really helpful.
Perfect. And round us off, Evan. What KPIs, what reports do you recommend specifically? Let's focus on adoption, right? In change management perspective, what are some of the things that we track and we recommend our customers track?
Great. So yeah, so one of the great things about Salesforce is that they have a lot of adoption dashboards ready to go. And so that makes it pretty easy to kind of focus your attention on what really matters. Typically what we look at things from kind of like a phased approach of adoption, utilization, and proficiency. And so from an adoption standpoint, this may just be, are our users logging in? And if so, like what was their frequency of logging in and how long are they staying on the system? As they kind of move up that curve, and as you get to see, like we have 100% login, 100% people have actually entered the system, you can start kind of looking at utilization. And that was getting to some of the metrics that Chris and Eugene referenced. Are records being created? Are people responding in the system? Looking at handle time, looking at time to accept. So some of these metrics start to kind of coexist. And then when we start looking at the proficiency standpoint, we start looking at, are things being done faster and better? Do we see a trend over time? And so typically what we'll do is we'll almost link up those adoption metrics with, as people start entering the system and using the system, are we starting to see a correlation with business outcomes? Are we starting to see people doing things faster or better as a result of better understanding and using the system?
Perfect. And I want to use that as a sort of segue, Chris, back to you and trying to understand, like, again, and you guys will see, we'll harp on this quite a bit because I do think, this is very important, right? The change management aspect of it, right? And not only so many people focus on that technology piece of it and less on the process and people piece of it. But I guess, Chris, directing this to you, ultimately, how did you manage these changes with your business to make this a success?
Yeah, a couple of different ways, and I'll start with executive stakeholder management here. Obviously Diligent has a PMO that, was established to help do that. But, when you look at the type of change that we made, we wanted to make sure that all of the appropriate senior stakeholders were bought in on the decision. We didn't want to get further on down the path to realize that we had a detractor, sitting somewhere in the background. And frankly, that began with the evaluation of systems. We did a robust business value analysis of all the options out there. Yes, we wanted data on, one platform, but you can integrate you want. It's not going to be cheap to do that, but we brought all of those types of analyses into the business value analysis for the switch to moving over. And we had everybody in lockstep agreement with what we were going to do and why we were going to do that. Obviously, it goes beyond just dollars and cents, but we always establish success criteria for our major programs, and we all agree on what success is going to be at the end of the day. And success just isn't we're done. It comes back to the metric conversation, right? Transition and change is not cheap, and we want to make sure that we are getting value out of our investment in the move. And so that's really key from an executive standpoint. Then we have all of our support team, and we had quite a few support teams, and we wanted to make sure that they were very large stakeholders in the transition. So when you look across all the different phases of our project, we had a fairly significant number of our support team members as part of the project. Couple things. One, it's great initial training before you ever have a single training session. UAT is great for that too, right? You get everybody using the system. It makes it a lot more successful in understanding where maybe your wonderful set of business requirements missed an edge case or two, and you catch that before go live and not after go live. So we looked at both of those sets of stakeholders to make sure that we were appropriately considering their thoughts and feelings and opinions about the change, and we incorporated that as we went along. Once again, another great thing about the phased approach is you learn a lot and you incorporate it as you move forward. So I feel like, when you look at that level of stakeholder management in the transition, hugely important to being successful at the end of the day. Very, very, very few detractors in the change. Obviously, we had a number of support folks who were used to Service Cloud, who were very, very excited, but we also had the same number of people who were Zendesk till they die. And, those are now thankfully very happy Service Cloud users at Diligent.
Perfect. And then, of course, Evan, I have to go to you, right? You've written books about this, and we certainly helped you by throwing you on 10 projects when you came over here too. So why don't you touch on ultimately what your advice is for people looking to make this change from a adoption standpoint?
Yeah, so a number of things. So I mentioned earlier, really taking a holistic approach. And don't sell yourself short on change management. I always cite ProSci, which is a leading change management institute. What they found is that 93% of projects with effective change management meet their objectives. That's delivering on time, within cost, within scope, and meeting any other objectives around your project goals. That's six times more effective than projects without effective change management. And so when you're thinking through adoption, when you're thinking through this whole process, I mean, Chris touched on a number of things. Making sure that you have an engaged sponsor is key. Having that executive buy-in, looking across your stakeholders, and again, I really emphasize focusing on the people who are going to be using the system or who may be tangential and related to the system, and really think through. This is more than just a technology change. This may be a process change. This may be some behavior change for them. And so how do we communicate best to them on, what's in it for them, why this matters, and how this is going to make their job more effective. Oftentimes too, going beyond that whole technology change and focusing on the process, sometimes you need to add some incentives in there as well. And so being able to not only just communicate, here's why this matters, but being able to think through, from a habit standpoint, from a reinforcement sustainment standpoint, let's celebrate our progress, let's celebrate milestones, and let's make sure that we're focusing on those quick wins, we're maintaining momentum, and we're thinking through, what are those next steps to really take this to the next level.
Perfect. Thank you, Evan. So with that, I mean, I know this sounds all great, and we executed absolutely perfectly. But I do want to open it up to some of the learns that we had. So Chris, I want to talk about ultimately, what would you give people for advice, right? And what we got, some of our gotchas and pitfalls that you want to keep in mind to ultimately provide a success for this kind of transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. We've not talked a ton about data and data migration just yet, but it's always the maybe least exciting part of any system transition out there. And when you are pulling together disparate data sources from a whole bunch of different systems with varying levels of maturity, you get a really ugly data set out there. So my caution and lesson learned is, when you start to script your approach to data migration, resist the urge to pull everything over. You don't need 10 years of support case data. We brought over 2 to get really good year-over-year reporting comparisons out of the system. But every time a data set moves, it gets a little bit less whole, and data migration is not free. And being able to make sure that you are bringing over a relatively clean set of data into your system to move forward with, really important, versus bogging yourself down in a really ugly data set that is going to sit in Salesforce and kind of stare at you for years to come. It's just not necessary, but it's frankly one of the things we hear a lot anytime we do it. I need 6 years worth of data. Candidly, you do not.
All right, and then good point. And Eugene, to kick it over to you too, right? I know you and I have embarked on this mission quite a few times, and even at the past companies as well. What are some of the big gotchas that you ultimately have seen other companies maybe fail at because they haven't taken this into consideration? What are some of your advice to the group here?
Yeah, number one, I would say biggest pitfall I've seen companies fall into pitfall. Yeah, that makes sense. Is that we are either doing discovery, that they're not bringing end users in early enough, right? And I think Chris talked about this a little bit earlier, but you do discovery with either IT folks, or you do discovery with managers, executive, senior leadership. And then when you get into UAT and you actually run into the project, the end users begin testing and say, well, actually, this isn't how the process works. This isn't how I do my job. This isn't how it looks day to day. This won't work perfectly for me. I'll harp on it as much as I can. Get end users into the process. Make sure that they are in discovery. Make sure that they're giving feedback. Make sure that they're in UAT. That will lead to a successful product because they're the ones that are ultimately going to be using it. So they'll be able to let you know how they can use it best. Evan already mentioned this a little bit before. They will also champion the product if they're involved in the creation of it and the way it works. They'll be excited when it goes live, and they will then tell their coworkers, why it's good and why they made certain decisions and why they gave certain feedback. So definitely get end users into the system, and places where we've seen it be less successful is when that hasn't happened. The other thing is just understand your capacity for change. Once again, this is to repeat what Chris said before, but if it makes sense for you to phase it out and for you to go one group at a time, because that's how you can make sure you're controlling change management. That's how you can deploy in an effective way. That's how you can also make sure that your teams are still doing their full-time jobs, which is what they're doing outside of this project. Make sure you think that through, make sure you plan that ahead. That's the reason, we're looking at a 6th phase with Diligent right now and didn't do it all in one shot. But I think it's because they spent a lot of time having those conversations and making those decisions. And then, it was something that was digestible for them. And, that's something that I would really, really spend some time thinking about, and how we want to deploy this. And the thing to keep in mind there is where are the connections between the different teams, right? And you want to make sure that you're not having people that are working in 2 different places. So as long as you can really think that through and understand, if we move, these teams together because they work together closely, that can be a set, and then we can kind of separate it that way. It's probably the best approach. But yeah, I would say, as simple as those 2 things sound, they make a world of difference.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then to that point too, and Chris, directing this towards you as well, as from a pre-sale side, and then continuing on in assisting some of my customers, right? This comes up all the time, like to Eugene's point about the customer involvement and setting roles and expectations up front. A lot of my customers come up to me or prospects even say, wait, does this mean I have to hire like a Salesforce admin after this? And or are you guys just going to continue? Like, how does that work? Or do we need a project manager? Chris, can you kind of talk through, because I think this is also a huge win for Diligent and what's been successful for us, the time commitment from your side that's been involved on this?
Absolutely. I mean, we have not hesitated to devote resources at Diligent to the project, and that does mean, pulling people off their day jobs for, a portion of the day, a portion of the week, or they come in and, initial design and discovery, come back and UAT. But we look at that investment of people in this project as a key criteria for success. I know we've talked a lot about the reasons why, but I think the more people that you can devote to a major project like this, the higher your chances of success. It's why my role exists, right? I sit here to help make sure that these types of large change happen appropriately, on time, on budget, on schedule, and with the appropriate scope. And that's my charge at Diligent. And it starts from creation of a project charter to do the things that we talked about, define what success looks like, define what our requirements are, define all of the people, both internal and external, that we know we need as part of a project to get to that success. I think it's one of the advantages, we talked about on chunking this up into phases, just being able to handle that, because depending on your size, you can't go ahead and devote a ton of resources at once to go, transition the whole place at one time. But we picked out that path that was right for Diligent, and we have invested the appropriate dollars and resources into making this project a success, which is why, 2 years later, I'm sitting here with this team, knowing that we have done a heck of a job, through 5+ phases of work, with the 6 to come, to get our entire support organization over to one unified platform that's going to set us up for success in the future.
Perfect. No, I appreciate it, Chris. All right. So we talked through, and lastly, right, we talked through a lot of the times with our customers, our prospects, right, the crawl, walk, run approach, right, and into that point, right, setting a foundation for you guys, right, was the combination of Sales Cloud, the combination of creating a case management process standardized throughout the business. And I know you guys are starting to dive in on digital channels, right, with bots and self-servicing through that community. But I guess what is next for Diligent, and what are you guys looking at taking on from this point forward, apart from the countless acquisitions you guys will continue to run in your industry?
Yeah, it's funny when you look at all the things that your teams do on a day in, day out basis. We want to really make sure that we nail down those standard transactional things really well. And I think we've really gotten ourselves into a place through the transition to do that. So, we've kind of hit that first part of the maturity curve for our support organization. We're humming on what standard work looks like. But I'll circle back to what I said around having all of my customer data in one place. I really want us as Diligent to go to the next level of being able to harness that entire set of customer data that we have in one place, and get far more sophisticated on understanding what our clients need to be successful and the things that we can do to help them. So much possibility in taking this large customer data set to understand things like customer health, what those folks need to be happy customers with us. We're really getting into that. It's extremely exciting to kind of move on to the next level of analytics usage at Diligent, to be able to just go beyond the standard transactional type measures that we looked at, to be far more strategic for our customer base.
Perfect. So it looks like we'll be keeping Eugene and his team busy for this foreseeable future here. All right. So with that, from a just panel discussion, I think we pretty much reached our questions. I guess level setting in the fact of where we're going as a company, NeuraFlash, right? I do want to open it up to the group here and ask a polling question around how many of your teams that are looking to take this on have thought about change management, right? And are planning around change management, because that gives us a good idea moving forward as we continue to get Evan and his team involved in just about every single one of our projects, whether it be 10 seats, whether it be 1,000 seats, right? Those are things that we want to see. And to that point in the action items, while we wait for QA in the last 15 minutes, as we're spot on from a timing perspective, we want to let you know that we're also doing a webinar in November around strictly change management. So we're going to be talking about those pillars that we talked through, right, of the technology as it relates to, or not only just technology, but as it relates to process and people and so on. So just wanted to poll the audience and see if that is something that is top of mind for you, as well as what we're seeing in the market. All right. Yes, I have a plan already. All right, perfect. There you go, Evan. That'll bring a smile to the face. And then we have another, I want to learn more about best practices for change management. All right. So, and then last but not least, 25%, no, I need assistance. So we're happy to help as I continue to bring up this contact us slide for both Chris and myself. I encourage you, if you're looking at making this a transition and this initiative from a contact center perspective, reach out, right? Again, we have not only done this quite a few times, we're starting to productize it, right? And we're starting to make it so we have relevant deliverables from Evan and his team from a change management perspective that can relate that verbiage, right? That can relate that process. So then it is becoming more of a process. And then from a data migration perspective, as Chris mentioned, we're starting to get more and more product around just migrating that data over without a massive uplift. So it's something we're continuing to invest in as we're seeing more and more companies do this. Let's see if I can share my screen now, if I can find it. In the meantime, I encourage anyone to start asking questions. There it is. And guys, just keep me honest because I can't see if people are asking questions.
And always happy to talk through folks if they have questions.
Sure. And I think there was one before I closed my screen around Chris, just understanding the time frame and how long this took. I think there were some questions around that.
Yeah, I think we tended to take things and call it 16-week bite-sized, projects, from start to finish, generally about right. Probably depends on how much capability and scope you're trying to add to any particular phase of the project, but that was pretty much average for us.
We have a question that just came in. So one of them is, this is for you, Chris. So AI is a hot topic nowadays. Is your support team leveraging any AI to help with efficiencies?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when you look at one of the capabilities that we wanted to turn on for our support teams was around internal knowledge base and being able to surface the appropriate, potential answers for that team as things came in. And obviously, the ability of the Service Cloud platform to sort of, ingest keywords, from an email ticket that might have come in and be able to pop up the right, knowledge base articles for our support team. Really good for us to, frankly, bring new members onto the team to provide them the appropriate resources to answer those questions. Get to drink out of a fire hose when you're a support agent coming on board. So it's always good to have those kind of constant reminders sitting there for us on the right-hand side of the screen. But I think, now that we have all of our, data sets and all of our agents working out of the same place, AI is real interesting to us to figure out how we do a better job of being able to automate, particular pieces of the process and give our support teams the appropriate guidance and help where they need it. Hugely important to, I think, where we're going to go in the future.
Thanks, Chris. The next question that we have here is, how are you handling resource planning and agent scheduling?
Yeah, given the way that we were constructed previously with kind of separate, support teams, we've been able to use our tool transition as a way to start centralizing those teams and using capability like skill sets and starting to direct cases to the appropriate way. But frankly, having all of this volume data sitting in one place has been very key to us understanding what our support organization needs to look like going forward, particularly when you're as acquisitive as we are. You buy a company and you have a best guess about how they are staffed and why they are staffed that way, but it isn't really until the data starts flowing in, you can see it with your eyes to really understand that. But when you look at like volume-based benchmarking, real key to understanding what that future organization looks like. And I think also, as you turn on capabilities inside Service Cloud, you're going to start to see changes in your mix, right? If you bring on more capability for self-service, hopefully you're going to start deflecting, cases into self-service, right? And the types of cases that your agents are handling are going to change. And you might have removed some of the very quick, easy ones that they were used to handling. And the cases that they now spend more time on are the ones that are a bit more complicated or maybe require back and forth with product to understand that there might be an issue. So you're going to see all those kinds of changes as you start to adapt and change where you are from a platform perspective. But just being able to have a one-stop shop for all of that data, we also do integrate with our kind of product road mapping and issue tracking systems as well. All that data is there, and that is extremely helpful for understanding what that organization looks like in the future, particularly as we enter 2022 budget season right now. So,
thanks, Chris. You're the popular one here. We have
another one. Wow.
Another one for Chris. The next question we have here is, how heavy of a lift is this for the team? Talent is hard to find in the Salesforce ecosystem right now. How can I ID internal folks that can take on project roles? What attributes should they have and how much time dedicated?
Yeah, I think when you look how we've put together our Salesforce admin team at Diligent, it has been one of the areas that we have invested in. Given our size, we know that we needed in-house capability to handle, the standard flow of, Salesforce tickets that come in, let alone just kind of, transformational projects like this one. But I would be remiss in saying that we didn't, frankly, outsource, a healthy chunk of that work to NeuraFlash as part of it, right? And you want to make sure that you have good knowledge transition at the end of the project to have someone in-house understand what was constructed and how that needs to be maintained going forward. We do use external third parties in certain areas to provide ongoing support where it doesn't make sense to have an FTE in-house to do that. But yeah, you are right that Salesforce talent is not in it's not overflowing out there in abundance, and it isn't cheap. But I think, when you decide to collapse in on one platform, it becomes easier to direct an investment in having that resource in-house for you. It's a lot easier to say I need a Salesforce person than half a Salesforce person and half a Zendesk person. That's going to be a heck of a lot easier to find out in the marketplace. But yeah, we definitely invest in our Salesforce team at Diligent. They are alongside as we go through any project, but we do rely on the NeuraFlash team to help provide a whole heck of a lot of support, but we do need to make sure that we find the appropriate maintenance resting place for that. Otherwise, you put yourself in danger of investing a lot of money in a transition and not finding the appropriate place to move that support to, and your investment is at risk. So yeah, it's an additional investment on top of your investment, but I think it's just healthy on how you manage your platform.
Thanks, Chris. We have one more question that came in. So if anybody has any other questions, please submit them. We're happy to answer some more questions here. But for the question that we have here is, what made you decide, to bring a partner in for this implementation?
For those of you who might be private equity owned, you might understand this, but we run very lean in our G&A team operations, and we are resourced in a way to allow those teams to handle day in, day out business, participate in projects, but they are we don't have the spare capacity sitting on the side to do these projects. And frankly, any good project or any good program has a start, it has a very nice middle, but it does end. Otherwise, it's probably not a project. It's probably just part of your ongoing operations at that point. But for something that is going to come to a close or kind of phase in, phase out, depending on merger and acquisition activity, we didn't personally believe internally that it made a lot of sense to have dedicated resourcing as diligent employees to carry out this work. We like to partner with companies out there, one, for resourcing, but two, leading and best practice understanding. We are not the end all be all experts of Service Cloud at Diligent, and nor do we have the time to keep pace with all the latest and greatest out there. We obviously have a very capable Salesforce, customer success and sales team that, helps us and rides along. But anytime you're doing major change, it's really good to have that third party there. Also, kind of the final, advantage, maybe not final, but another good one is, when you do have disagreement internally, a good third party provider serves as a neutral referee to help kind of, navigate your way through any of those sticky choices that you have to make. I am a reformed consultant. I spent a very long time in consulting. And one of the more jarring pieces of that transition into industry was no longer being able to say I was that third-party neutral referee. I try, but it's one of those great things that a third-party partner brings you.
Thanks, Chris. So that's right now our last question for today. If anybody has any other questions, we'll be staying on for another couple minutes. So you can send them by the Q&A button, or you can send them also by the chat. So Randy, I can hand it back to you for closing off the session.
Yeah, no, and thank you for directing all of those to Chris. Appreciate it. I mentioned the call to action too prior, but again, guys, I encourage you, even if it's just a conversation of where to get started, or again, some more metrics behind what our customers have seen for building out those ROI models, right? We have a ton of data behind what some of the companies have done, Diligent being one of them, right, with these transformations. So again, I encourage you to reach out to me, reach out to Eugene, Evan, and then if you guys are looking for a governance software, reach out to Chris as well. But no, thank you for joining today, and we look forward to seeing you on either our change management webinar next week or again further down the line. But thank you all for the time.
Thank you all.